Hi, and thank you for having me. My name is Renaud Deraison. I'm co-founder and CTO at Tenable, and I'm also known to be the author of the Nessus vulnerability scanner. The title of my talk today is The Rise of Pragmatic Security. And what I'd like to talk about, or what I'd like to do to illustrate a little bit how we're thinking at Tenable, is to kind of take a trip through memory lane and go through the last 25 years of my life. So it will sound a little egotistical and self-centered, and I apologize for that, but I figured that it might be a nice break from having a lot of slides with facts. So let's start with the history of Nessus and how it got started and why, and more importantly, how was the security industry then, right? Because what I really want to talk about today is how the security industry has started to evolve and needs to continue to evolve to continue to do a good job in today's environment. So in the late 90s, in 97, I was really interested in security. And, at the time, the security industry, if you will, was really just a mailing list. It really was a mailing list called Bugtrack, where researchers, which were very few of them at the time, would publish advisories when they would find security issues, right? So you had a lot of 0 days by then. Some vendors would proactively send advisories, etc. But that was it. You had no real vulnerability database. So the way InfoSec team kept updated at the time really was to basically check the emails, and then every time a new flaw would be published, they would have to find out if it affected the environment. And keep in mind, late 90s, it really was a rise of the internet, and the attack surface was fairly small for every company, right? It was what was called the DMZ at the time, and the DMZ really was a web server and sometimes a backup web server and so DNS servers and email, and that was it, right? So you had little exposure. The exposed infrastructure was not critical, right? The worst case scenario was somebody would steal your email or deface your website, but that was it. But more importantly, it was small and manageable. So whenever a new flaw would be published, people would say, oh, okay, there's a flaw in Apache. We know we don't use Apache, right? And so we're not affected, or we are, and we're going to upgrade. And that was fine. However, with the massive adoption of the internet, that attack surface started to expand, and quickly enough, it became very difficult to keep track of all the flaws out there. And my personal philosophy has always been that you need to understand what you have, and you make sure that everything is properly patched. And if it is, you're going to reduce the risk of being breached, right? So I decided to write an open source software called Nessus. I released it on that same mailing list in 98. And really the idea at the time was, let's write a software which will automate this whole job of like checking your email and seeing if you're affected, right? So basically it was really meant to be a live vulnerability database which would identify your systems, identify which flaws are out there, and tell you how to fix them. Very simple. And one of the goals at the time when I released it was to make it easy to use. It's actually, if you look at the announce in 1998, that was one of the statement. Now you're going to say, well, vulnerability scanner and easy to use sounds a little bit like an oxymoron, and I get it. But that was the idea. And so I released it, and I thought I would be done with it. And much to my surprise, what happened is that I started to get a lot of feedback, right? I started to get users really saying, hey, there's a bug here, or could you add new detection for this new flow, etc. And soon enough, it became part of my daily life. And I would update signatures, and a lot of people used it as a scanner for the DMZ, but also started to say, hey, our infrastructure is starting to be really connected, and we need to do more. And so that's why I then co-founded Tenable. Tenable was the idea of Tenable was we're going to allow organizations to really get a grasp, not just on what their external attack surface is, but on the entire infrastructure. And so we released a console called Tenable.sc, which would coordinate multiple Nessus scanners and kind of really do a job of doing an exhaustive enumeration of everything in the infrastructure. And customers starting to use it. Customers liked it because not only it would enumerate everything, but it would also allow you to report by business unit. It would allow you to report by user and kind of like divide the result and kind of tell people in different departments what they need to fix and insert in your ticketing system and whatnot. And as we continue to develop Security Center, we also started to do more ways to detect vulnerabilities. Again, we truly believe that understanding your whole infrastructure is key, right? If you patch everything, if you do the basic blocking and tackling of managing your systems, keeping them up to date, then you're going to really reduce your attack surface. Now, so we added new detection methods. We had a passive scanner, which would basically listen on the network and kind of like infer based on the traffic between hosts what vulnerabilities are out there, so people would actually have a real-time view of everything and flows. We had a log system which could infer vulnerabilities from the logs, etc., etc. So we really spent a lot of time there. Now, what happened in parallel is that the industry has changed a lot, right? And I'm not talking about the security industry. I'm talking about technology in general. You had to move first to virtual machines, then to the cloud. And more importantly, the entire infrastructure became critical. And that's a key thing. I think that what we saw with attacks like WannaCry a few years ago is that there was a haha moment for a lot of CXOs around the world where they really thought their digital infrastructure was helping the business, right? So be a little bit more efficient when you, instead of like putting Post-it notes on a desk, you send an email to somebody. It makes you more efficient. Or instead of asking somebody for the latest sales number, you can go to Salesforce and whatnot. And what they realized with WannaCry is that the infrastructure has become the company. And for organizations where you would think technology is really a supporting role, right? A good example is hospitals, right? You would ask any doctor before WannaCry, you would ask any doctor, is IT really helping you guys? And most of them would basically say, no, it gets in the way. But they would say, yeah, it's priority number 20 in a hospital, right? Our MRI machines are more important or whatever. When WannaCry hit, suddenly hospitals could not take any new patients, right? Or they could not deliver medication, right? So a lot of people realized, wait a minute, the infrastructure became strategic to any company. That's like the biggest change. The second change is that some pockets in the organization which were not really meant to be connected became connected, right? A lot of smart factories, or so-called smart factories, were designed to kind of operate in an air-gap environment. So you would have your factory and all your PLCs and whatnot connected through an IP network, but they were not meant to be connected to the internet. Now with the rise of digital transformation and all this, suddenly you've got companies who want to see on their iPhones a pressure gauge on all the factories, furnace or whatever they do of the company. And so they started to connect all these devices, right? So now you expand not only the digital infrastructure became more strategic, but it completely expanded, and a lot of boundaries got removed. And as a result, the velocity of change has really grown, right? It's impossible in this day and age to really understand what your infrastructure looks like. You can know about it for like a short period of time, but after a few hours, it's going to morph already. And also, the role of the CISO has changed a lot. And that actually is something which is really important. The role of the CISO over the last 20 years really changed from basically, the joke in the late 90s was that the CISO was a no in innovation. And it has evolved to actually become a strategic player in the organization, right? We've seen it a lot of in a lot of reporting structures. Now the CISO reports directly to the CEO, not to the CIO. So you have this kind of conflict of interest there, which got changed. But also, the role of the CISO in his organization is they've been roped into many projects way before, right? I remember the common complaint about security at the time was that security was always brought last in any kind of project, right? Just to rubber stamp the project. And that has changed. All right, so that has changed. And as a result, because this role is more strategic, there's way more pressure on the CISO and way more pressure to communicate effectively, way more pressure to manage the environment and whatnot. And the traditional approach of fixing everything wrong doesn't work anymore, right? Because again, the infrastructure is too big, it changes too quickly. It's really, really difficult to have a kind of all or nothing approach to security. And, the security industry has really been guilty of being very absolutist. And with security vendor, we were part of the problem, where for security, things are either secure or it's the end of the world. There's very, very little nuance in between. And then it's up to the customers to kind of adapt and say, well, the tool says this is the end of the world. So what should we do? And so this is actually a real problem. And so at Tenable, we're trying to tackle this problem in many ways, right? The first one is we're trying to do what we call risk-based vulnerability management. And what that means is that instead of taking every vulnerability in absolute, right, saying, and relying on what is called the CVSS score to see if it's critical or not, and then tell customers, well, you need to fix it. We're trying to be much smarter about it. We're trying to be smarter about it in multiple ways. So the first one is we did a different scoring system, which tries to forecast which vulnerabilities out there are going to be part of a critical attack, right? And we can do that based on multiple factors, right? We do this by monitoring social media, monitoring the dark web and whatnot, and basically saying, okay, well, this vuln, every public exploit about it, that's not good. And at the same time, we also look at the past result of the same software, right? Like, well, last time there was a similar vuln in that software, there was like, I don't know, big malware strain which used it, or it was used in some campaigns. So, and the flip side is other vulnerabilities, like nothing really happened last time there was something which was deemed critical in that software, right? There's no public exploit, nobody's really talking about it. Maybe this is not what we want to fix first, right? And by bringing this kind of pragmatism to the table, we actually help our customers kind of focus on what matters, right? So instead of treating every problem out there as on an equal footing, we say, well, okay, we shouldn't, if you can only fix 3 things today, that should be the 3 one. It seems very simple. It actually makes a huge difference. We have customers who basically said this has completely changed the way they do vulnerability management, because now it's not about chasing everything for the sake of it. It's really like 2 buckets, if you will, of vulnerabilities. You've got one bucket, which is, okay, this needs to be fixed today, right? This is critical. This is a 0 day. Everybody's talking about it. And that represents a very small slice of problems, right? Because face it, how many critical vulns have been published this year, which really are remotely exploitable, like massively exploited? Very, like, you can count them with the fingers of two hands, right? So you've got this bucket, and then you've got your, what I call, cyber hygiene bucket of vulnerabilities, which need to be fixed, but maybe they don't warrant going over time or kind of losing sleep over, right? It should be fixed as part of your normal routine of updating and managing your systems. And so that's the first thing we did. The second thing we did is that we released a software called Lumen, which helps the CISO talk to the level of their audience and their peers, right? So basically, security and security tools in particular have done a fantastic job to produce reports that nobody can read, right? It's very technical, it's very verbose, and it's not in language of business, right? It's about, we received 1 million attacks, or we have 6 million flaws with that CVSS, and CV 2021-1234 is prevalent. And that's kind of fine within the confine of the InfoSec team. But as I mentioned earlier, the CISO's role is becoming much more strategic, right? The CISO reports to the board of directors, to the risk committee, reports to the CISO, reports to the other C-suite, or talks with the other C-suite. And there is a need to have a much more business-oriented view of the world, right? And so instead of talking about CV everywhere and whatnot, it's much more important to talk about non-performing business units, for instance. So with Lumen, we kind of do that. We kind of help customers take all these vulnerabilities, ponder with our scoring system. We also determine which systems are critical or not based on their attributes. So we can say, well, that system really seems important because you've got, I don't know, a terabyte of data going through it every day, and it has, it's running SAP and whatnot, so that really matters. That other system is an iPad, so it may be not important. So we kind of try to have an automated understanding of the business, and then we let our users really slice and dice the result by business unit or business process and whatnot, and report on it. And it makes a big difference because now the CISO can basically say, hey, our sales unit in Europe is behind its SLA when it comes to patching, right? It's a very different discussion than just saying CV, whatever is everywhere. And the other thing I would mention, by the way, is the speaker before me, Jimmy, he said something really interesting, right? He said, you need a security champion in every organization, right? HR and sales, etc. And I completely agree with him, right? You do need more thinking about security throughout the company, and you need people to think more about possible risk when, whether it's opening an email or the behavior and whatnot, and having a champion is good. But the opposite is true too, right? You need a sales champion, an HR champion, a dev champion within the InfoSec team, right? So that the InfoSec team is not just thinking about fixing problems for the sake of them, for the sake of fixing them, but they need a much better understanding of the needs of the business and to align to it, right? And that's kind of what we're trying to achieve with Lumen, where we tell our customers, but we provide these kind of tools to the customers to kind of think that way, right? And align the needs of security with the needs of the business. And it's really important. I've always been amazed at, and hope, and thankfully it's changing, but not too long ago, I met some real bright CISOs, and when I would start to ask a little bit more about the details of what the company do and really the intricacies, and I was shocked with how many would say, well, I don't really do this. It's not, I just take care of the security. I don't really know how the factories work and whatnot. And that can go on, right? To be efficient and to be pragmatic about security, you need to understand what the business is doing and whatnot. So that's really important. The other thing that we did, which I think is really changing is, so we announced this week the acquisition of the intent to acquire a company called Accurix. And so what I found really interesting with these guys is that in the same way that the CISO needs to adapt to the language of the business, what we're seeing with the velocity of security is that, with the velocity of change in the infrastructure, is that there is a need now, especially in the world of cloud, for the InfoSec team to adapt to the language of the DevOps team, right? So instead of talking about systems which are unpatched, and instead of talking about ACLs which should be changed differently and whatnot on some AWS resource, they should actually talk about changing, like they should talk about changing their Terraform script so that when that system get respawned, it actually is done in a secure way. They should actually they should not give just recommendation, but they should adapt to the language and send like an actual pull request in Git to say, okay, well, here is a patch to make your system better. And ultimately, the InfoSec team, when it comes to the cloud, really should be in a position where they co-develop the infrastructure with the cloud team, right? And that's really what we're going to do with Accurix. I'm very excited about it. I'm excited about it because it really is going to change the way InfoSec is being perceived. Or it continues to change the way InfoSec is being perceived in the company. I truly believe, if you look at everything, technology, it evolves. It's mostly for the best. But what I think is missing still in the evolution of InfoSec is really that common language, right? It's the fact that security people talk about security. They don't talk business. They don't talk security tools. Sorry, talk security, and they don't think business and something. And at Tenable, we're very excited to kind of really help customers, provide customers with tools to really adapt to all these levels of security. So, I'm really, really, really excited. And the change of cloud, I mean, I could spend an hour on it, but it really changes the way we think about security, right? It changes the way systems are being managed. It changes the way it continues to accelerate the velocity of change. It really is an opportunity to build things securely from the start, and in a way where InfoSec can actually help DevOps before the deployment. So we kind of break that traditional motion of having the production team, the operation team deploy something, and then InfoSec kind of coming after and saying, well, this is not good, right? We really want to help customers have a dialogue before deployment and really be part of the design. So very excited about all this, and we're very excited about helping customers have that kind of pragmatic discussion and pragmatic approach to security, to kind of not just fix issues for the sake of fixing them, but fixing them based on how it affects their business. That's pretty much what I wanted to share. Thank you for listening. We have a virtual booth, and if you have any question, feedback, I'm happy to meet with you guys there and have some one-on-one time. So feel free to drop by at the Tenable booth, and thank you for everything, and enjoy the rest of the event.